Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bankroll Burners, the poker podcast for poker players who can't stop getting it in bad. I'm Mike,
And I'm Josh.
and once again, we are here to talk about how bad we are at poker and go through some hands that we could have played better that were interesting. And let me tell you, Josh, I played a 7-hour session this week, and there were exactly two interesting hands in this session. I was card dead for the vast majority. I actually played in the 7 hours I played. I ended up even, which was really exciting. That's kind of
Very
mostly where you
exciting.
want to be. I was down 900 at one point, so I did battle back from a pretty bad swing. But by and large, it was a fun table, so there was that. But from a bankroll perspective, very little burning was done.
Sounds like we had similar sessions. I had booked a small loss with a pretty card dead session as well. I think most of my loss just came from calling pre-flop and then missing, which I just shouldn't have done. Like a lot of these situations once where it's like, I probably shouldn't call here. And then I called because I'm like, bad. So spots like that are really a leak I'm planning on really working on because, we talk a lot about how especially when tables are pretty passive, it's fine to, good placed if you want to play more hands to widen your range is sort of in widening your opening range, especially when the table's pretty passive and you have opportunities to sort of really attack your opponent's post flop. Probably the worst place you can do it is in the pre-flop calling range once one of those passive opponents has put in the raise.
That's right. Yeah, calling pre-flop, something that should be done as I mean, some people say something should be done very intentionally. Like you should only do it for very specific reasons, and almost never. You should almost always do better fold pre-flop. I don't necessarily think that's always the case. I think from certain seats, certainly like the big blind, for example, it's you can and should call with a wide range of hands, but definitely it's probably good for your EV to trim down on your pre-flop calling in general.
Yeah, and obviously, we've talked about it to some extent, but, if you want to call sometimes with small suited aces, with small pocket pairs, that otherwise, if you were playing, for example, online or against, a full table of competent opponents, you'd probably just want to fold or three-bet bluff. There are times, I think you can definitely open up your calling ranges with those hands because you're very likely to go to a flop multi-way, and so having a hand with really good implied odds and that's always, if it flops something, it's often going to flop, a nutted hand or a nutted draw. Those are kind of the opportunities to do so. As we've talked about the last couple weeks, doing so with something like suited connectors or, offsuit aces or offsuit broadways or something, pretty much going to be lighting money on fire.
Yeah, right. Yeah, lighting the money on fire. Yeah, I mean, hey, don't ever take our advice on anything. But if you're going to take one piece of advice, just you're talking about what you might want to do, Josh, in a situation where you're at a table with a bunch of competent players. I mean, my advice personally would be to leave that table.
Yes, well, of course.
That's my approach. So,
And as we're talking about being sort of card dead, I was reminded by sort of a topical tweet that I saw that quoted the great Phil Galfond as saying the best way to make money while being card dead is to not try to make money while being card dead.
nah, wise words. Wise
Because the
words
more you
indeed.
force things when you have bad cards, the worse situations you will put yourself into.
That's very true.
And with that in mind, why don't we hop right into a hand? I'm happy to lead it off.
Sure.
I've got a hand from quite a while ago. Let me find it real quick. It's a kind of an interesting hand, and we're gonna just again. This was from a few weeks ago. This was actually the same table I played at. I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe three. With sort of this crazy drunk VIP player that I had played with. Given that it was a few weeks ago, I have tried to again work on a couple of the leaks in my game, like pre-flop calling. So we're gonna ignore the pre-flop part of this hand where I make a loose pre-flop call.
Totally ignore. Okay.
Nice to couch this sort of thing, but we're playing 1-3 Encore Boston Harbor as usual. The effective stack here is going to be 500. There's going to be no straddle on, so 1-3 quite deep stacked. This was again a great table, a lot of sort of ABC players. One guy who was just obviously there to have fun, making just crazy hero calls, crazy raises, just having a great time. And in this particular hand, he's going to open raise to 23 from the low jack.
That's a nutted size.
Yep, and I don't read too much into it from him because he is just like taking these weird sizes with a bunch of hands. Like sometimes he just limps great hands, and sometimes he just raises large with garbage. So I'm in the cutoff with 8-9 of spades, and I decide to call. Probably shouldn't do that too much. It's 8-9 of spades. I have to call a lot of money here. It's like a 7x raise. But
Yeah,
the cutoff is a good position to do it.
yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. Like it can't be that terrible from the cutoff. I do think that playing this hand with a betting lead is going to be like way easier. And also, if the button calls behind you, you're going to hate life. But okay, is that what happens?
I think 3-betting makes a lot of sense, especially against this player. I'm going to win a lot, or I have kind of an easier way to play in position. So, for all the reasons we've discussed previously, try not to call especially huge sizings, cold call pre-flop suited connectors. But everyone else does fold, so as far as calling goes,
yeah, it works out. And I will just say one thing about, in general, field calling, since we're on this topic. One thing a lot of people will be like, oh, on the button, I don't mind a call as much because you're in position, yada yada. And I think that's true in general, that calling on the button more is okay. But one thing that, again, people often don't think about is like, so let's say you've got like a middle position raise, right? And you call on the button and the big blind completes, for example. So you're going, you've sort of priced the big blind in even more so they're going to call. Maybe they were going to call anyway. And they complete. And what's going to happen on the flop is the big blind's going to check and the pre-flop aggressor may bet. And then you're going to be actually in the middle. Which means you are going to have to defend quite a bit narrower. And so you're not, even though you are in position, you're not going to be able to do nearly as much sort of floating, trying to take it away on later street type of strategy that you can often do from the button that makes, being on the button so great. You've kind of actually taken away that capability from yourself by simply calling on the button. So I just think that's one thing I've been thinking about lately that I figured was worth bringing up.
Yeah, and I think that's why people kind of say, good hands that you can call with on the button sometimes are like those sort of pocket pairs, suited aces sort of hands where, you're not going to flop like a middle pair all that often, whereas if I cold call, with 8-9 of spades, the button, and then like the button calls, and the flop is, like ace-9 deuce, I'm just going to have to fold when the original raiser bets with a player behind me.
Right, which really, really sucks.
Yeah, and also, I mean, heck, if you're on the button with most of these hands, like a suited ace, we love playing big pots in position. Throw in the 3-bet. Like, if you want to be in position so bad, play a nice pot. Right. So a lot of interesting pieces here, but obviously, if you have a hand like pocket eights or something, and you're like, well, I can just call on the button because even if someone calls behind me, kind of know where I'm at post flop the vast majority of the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, the flop is going to come out here. It's going to be 9-3 deuce rainbow. It's going to come out 9 of clubs, 3 of diamonds, deuce of hearts. I've got 8-9 of spades. So we flop kind of a top pair with a weak kicker. And the low jack checks to me. And I like to check it back this time. I think he is definitely a pretty trappy player. I could definitely be betting here a lot of the time for protection. I think that's totally fine. I don't hate checking it back once in a while for pot control also, and because I think he definitely might just start like spewing and just bluffing like a lot on later streets. So I'm kind of thinking, I don't mind a bet here, but this isn't really a hand I'm going to get 3 streets with. I'll see another card and let him bluff at it.
I think that's fair. I do tend to like to bet when I make a top pair that's not that on a very dynamic board. Like where the top card of this board is likely to be different by the river. It won't always be, but there's likely to be a Jack 10, Queen King, Ace, which are all cards that hit his pre-flop raising range. Presumably, I mean, obviously he's a little wild, but probably he has one of those cards in his hand, and especially if he just has like King Jack offsuit or something, and he's like, well, I missed this. I guess I'm gonna check. I mean, it's a good idea. You can bet really small for protection. You can. What is the pot now? It's like $50. You could bet 15 or 20, like just to sort of clean up a little bit. But
yeah, I agree. I think this board in particular, 9-3 deuce, a lot less dynamic than, some other possible boards. Like, yes, the top pair is likely going to change, but, at least there aren't really that many credible draws here. that, I need even more protection against. So
Sure.
I definitely agree with your point that I probably betting here a good majority of the time, but I think mixing in some checks is reasonable, and that's what I do. The turn is now going to come the 3 of spades, so it completes the rainbow and pairs the middle card.
Okay. Probably he doesn't have a 3, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and especially when he checks it over to me. And now I think I do need to bet. I think I can get some value from random Broadway cards, over cards. Still helpful to protect against those top pairs as well. Sorry, not those top pairs. Those, potential top pairs. Over cards, as we like to call them. And potentially get value from any sort of draw that might be out there. If he does have something like ace-4, ace-5, certainly possible. Probably doesn't have a worse 9, but for all the reasons you said on the flop, I think betting here kind of small makes a lot of sense. And I decided to bet 15.
Okay. Yeah, just thinking about this even more, I like there are less hands there are less worst hands. There are a fewer number of worse hands, is what I'm trying to say, that will call you on the turn than on the flop. Because I actually think if he just was king queen, let's say you had king queen with a backdoor that he just checked the flop with, and that he would definitely call a bet. He won't now, right? Even if he just had king queen with no backdoor and he's maybe I'll hit a king or a queen. Now there's one less card to come, so it might fold now. But anyway, yeah, I like that.
All good points. And now kind of the fun part of the hand kicks in, where the player grabs $15 in chips and slides them across in a call and says, I'm going to call you down with ace high.
Okay.
So, it's kind of a fun, it's a thing where I'm thinking, I think he's probably being honest because, ace high is, a lot of his range at this point. And also this guy, obviously is not in it for the strategy. He's trying to, level people. Mm-hmm. So he does call and he makes that statement, and the pot is now 80. And the turn is a kind of interesting card. The river is an interesting card. It's the 8 of diamonds. It doesn't change that much, I would say, in terms of my hand strength. The board is now 9-3 deuce 3-8. I've got 9-8 of spades. So I make top 2 pair, but obviously I'm still losing to any over pair if he does, by some miracle have one of those. Because the 3 is paired. And he does check it over to me. So, I'm thinking...
He never. I was gonna say, well, the fact that you have an 8 makes it less likely that he made a set here with pocket 8s or something. But
true. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is kind of an interesting spot where I'm sort of thinking about sizing and kind of definitely giving a good amount of weight to his statement where he's I'm going to call you down with ace high. And that kind of brought up an interesting dynamic to me where I was kind of thinking, well, I feel like if I bet too big, he's just going to fold. Because he doesn't actually want to call me down for a lot with ace high. So I just have to bet really small here and just get calls.
Interesting. Okay.
What do you think? Would you just kind of bet 80 here and just think that he's going to call me down because that's what his heart is set on?
Yeah, absolutely. I would pot it. I would just be I guess, this is the thing. If he didn't say anything, sometimes the way I approach speech play is what if they didn't say anything? What would you do?
And I think I probably would bet small here if they didn't say anything. Because I don't think, if you bet big, I don't think you're really getting value from anything worse.
Right. The question is, what are you trying to get called by at all? Right? You're trying to get called by, 7s, 6s, or, a non-believing ace-queen, maybe.
Or if you're super lucky, a 9, right? ace-9, 10-9. But a lot of those hands would likely have continued, at least bet the flop or the turn, one would imagine.
Yeah, he probably doesn't have those hands. So I guess if you pretend he didn't say anything, you probably are taking sort of a value-y size here.
And just hope you get called by ace-high or a pair below the 8.
Yeah, okay, so I guess I can be on board with that. The only thing I will say is, if this is a fun player and they're, really, really goofy, I might, and they're oh, I'm going to call you down with ace high. It might be kind of fun just to, put in the large bet and see what happens. Yeah, it's probably the highest EV play here is to bet, 30 or something, but I might bet 80 just for fun.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting, because, I didn't really think about that at the time. I was wow, I am pretty sure he has ace high, because, he did... This is, by the way, a guy who called a shove at one point with ace queen high on the turn and like a large shove and was shown pocket jacks and then drilled the queen on the river to everyone's, surprise and delight. So it's certainly possible, thinking about it now with this sort of VIP, like that actually might be a really good exploit, is to just say, wow, this guy is just going to call whatever I bet. I should bet like 100.
Right.
And just
right,
because, like literally 100.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's fair. I mean, yeah, it's just fun. Like, you're just having fun with this guy at this point, right? Like, your goal, like, when you're playing with a whale like that, or what you really want to, like, play big pots with them. And that's when you that's how you make the money from them, right? And so this is not a big pot. So I don't really care, like, about eking a little bit more value out of this pot too much, I guess. I would much rather just, personally, I would rather, for the fun of it, and keeping the mood light, keeping things funny, try to put in $100.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you may recall, to our devoted listeners, that we had a hand a few weeks ago where this particular player raised and then called a 3-bet with Jack 6 offsuit and turned it into a bluff on a board in which he had no equity. So exactly that sort of thing is where you want to build that rapport and like make them want to play pots with you, because you just have like an enormous advantage because you are not, well, if most of you will not be spewing off equity in large pots, I won't say the same for us. But I like to go small and bet 20 because I was like, well, I just want to make sure I get called here. And he does call pretty quickly. And I show the 8-9 and he does show, I think he shows ace-7 offsuit. So,
a classic 7x open raise hand.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, one of those things where afterwards I was like, well, this is kind of an interesting spot because I love thinking about the speech play when, like, what would you have done if he hadn't said anything? How are you going to adjust to it? Like, is he actually being honest, and do you give any credence to it? And in this case, obviously from most players, I probably wouldn't. And I might interpret it more as a sign of strength. But for this player, it's like, well, he's like not actually paying attention to the dynamic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, like, I really do try to just ignore what people say at the poker table because by and large, they're lying. So, but okay, fair enough. It's funny. I, in this 7-hour session, did play with a similarly enthusiastic whale type of player who did call a $1,000 shove pre-flop with ace-9 offsuit. So,
wow. Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. So I agree. It's one of these things where it would have been much more fun to just put in a big bet and kind of put him in the tank and get him engaged and having fun. So kind of an interesting hand, a little bit more of a low stakes, like not in the sense of that it's a low stakes game, but that, we're not playing for stacks. We're just kind of, an interesting spot. But tell me about the game you played this week, and let's hop into the next hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this game, it's 2-5, and there eventually came a point in the night where we were all straddling, but this was before then, so this was just straight 2-5. There's an occasional straddle. I was took me about 2 hours of straddling before I got the rest of the table to do it, but then everyone was doing it. It was a good time. But this is just a 2-5 hand. Pretty early on in the night, and both the hands tonight are against the same villain.
Cool.
Who is a competent player, absolutely a competent player. Someone who likes to talk poker theory at the poker table, which I generally don't enjoy doing, but hey, and that's fine. He was a super nice guy, liked him a lot, and both these hands are versus him because obviously I only want to play hands against players who are better than me. So
that's the key to making money.
Yeah. So in this one, we are 825 effective. We're 8-handed, and this villain opens it up from the +1 position to $25, which I would say he seemed to be switching back and forth between a $20 and a $25 sizing. He seemed to be using them
fairly large. So I mean, for the game.
Most of the time in these games, it's very table dependent, but at 2-5, best bet Orange Park, which by the way is where this hand is played, $500 cap. In general, people are opening to $20. That is most common. There are some tables where it's like 25 or 30, and some tables where it's 15, but this was sort of a $20 table. I didn't read anything into the sizing,
okay.
Especially. I'm in the hijack. I have ace 5 of diamonds. Pretty standard 3-bet here. I make it 75. Folds back around to him, and he calls.
He calls.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think this is standard. I do think from the early position open, we can probably mix in folding some of these, suited wheel aces, and there's some, good randomization skills to use. We once saw a player ask Google for a random number between 1 and 100 to randomize.
That was pretty good.
Whatever you do, but obviously nothing wrong with 3-betting, thinning the field. We hate pre-flop calling, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, versus this is opponent's early position raise. I'm folding ace deuce and ace 3. I'm probably 3-betting ace 4 and ace 5, something like that.
Yeah.
There are certain villains where I would 3-bet all of those, and certain villains where I would fold all of those. Just depends.
Yep. Makes total sense.
So, anyway, pretty standard spot here, $150 to a flop. And the flop comes king of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 5 of spades. We got bottom pair in the nut flush draw.
That's a good flop for us.
I was pleased. What do you do? He checks, unsurprisingly. What would you do on this flop?
Well, I would definitely want to bet.
Yes.
I like betting. I think it's an interesting spot to take. I mean, I think as usual, there's nothing wrong with doing like sort of a smaller sizing. We definitely do have a range advantage here. I mean, we are the only one who can have pocket kings. He's probably the only one who can have pocket 5s. Probably shouldn't have pocket 5s all that much, but I think he is getting close to the implied odds to call.
Yeah, I mean, he had to call 50 to win.
750, pretty much right on the cusp.
Yeah, you can call 5.
So it's an interesting spot, but with the board being relatively dynamic, like there are a lot of draws, like a lot of 1 pair plus backdoor sort of hands, and straight, a lot of gutters. Obviously, Queen Jack is an open ender, and these are like there are a lot of hands that villain could definitely have. Like Jack 10 suited, King Queen, King Jack, like. So I actually don't mind kind of going on the larger side on this flop because it is relatively dynamic, and we are drawing to the nuts also. And so this is a spot where if we take this larger sizing, we want to polarize to where it's really our best value and our best draws that are making this sort of larger sizing and not just sort of throwing all of our hands into that c-bet spot.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, you can use multiple sizing. Like, you can say, on this board with most of my hands, I'll use a small sizing, but I will take a large sizing with some. And I think this would qualify. I actually do like a large sizing here, like 100, maybe 120, possibly.
Yeah, and I even think ace 5 of diamonds is probably a better one to do that with than like ace 4 of diamonds, because having the pair means we have even more outs to improve. Like, an ace is likely going to... our 2 pair will likely be the best 2 pair. He probably shouldn't have ace king all that much. Obviously a 5 will almost certainly give us like a really disguised best hand. But it's kind of an interesting spot because there might be some merit to taking the hand with less showdown value and making the larger sizing as sort of more of a bluff. So yeah, I think you kind of go both ways there, but I don't mind a large sizing at all.
Yeah, I agree. I did end up just taking a $50 standard 1/3 size here, and I think that was a bit of a mistake on my part. But I don't think it can't be that bad, but
yeah.
So I do, and he calls. So
yeah, and obviously, like given our exact hand, there aren't all that many hands he should be raising. Like, just because we have a flush draw, there's not that many flush draws in his range. Obviously, he can have like the up and down. He can have the royal draw. But like there's not, given the composition of the board, there's not too many diamond draws he can really have. So, if he check raised us, there's just not that. It's kind of a weird spot in terms of his betting composition.
Definitely. I mean, I think it would be like pocket 10s.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he could definitely have pocket 10s, pocket 5s for value, and like flush draws, and maybe Queen Jack like with a diamond, but Queen Jack offsuit.
You shouldn't have pocket 5s, given that we have a 5. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so cool. Great that he calls. Nice to know that we might even be ahead.
Yeah, we might. I mean, I think you can have like 9s. Any 10.
Yep.
Anything. So the turn now is the 10 of spades. Pairs the middle card. So we now have king of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 5 of spades, 10 of spades. So there's now a second flush draw out there, and the middle card pairs. And he once again checks it to me. Okay.
Well, I think I like taking kind of a large sizing on this on this card. This really cuts down on his value combos. Like, I think pocket tens is like a big, thick value hand he has. You know, if he has something like king 10, that also is cut down on. He obviously has like a lot of kings, you know, probably king queen, king jack suited. Definitely in his range. But, you know, if we kind of bet large on the turn in the river, we can probably get those hands to fold a lot of the time. I guess stack sizes are a concern if we bet large, but I mean, even if we bet, you know, even if we made a pot size bet, we'd still have, you know, a 3/4 pot size bet left, just about. So I kind of like and you know, I know I said our 5 might be best, but I think it's probably not best, and if it is, then we're not getting value from worse more. So I do kind of like starting to build the pot, look to make our draw. Given the composition of the board, there just aren't that many boats. Like any sort of... We really shouldn't be drawing dead here unless he has one of the 2 combos of king 10 suited. Or the 1 combo of 10s or 5s remaining. So, I think I do... For all those reasons, I think I like a big bet.
Do you think there's any concern that, like... I mean, generally when the middle card pairs, it's better for the pre-flop caller. So, that was what I was thinking about in game. I was like, oh, he's much more likely to have a 10 here than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Definitely something to consider, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think he's that much more likely to have a 10 also, because I think you will be like 3-betting a lot of hands that have 10s in them, given your position. Like, you know, I don't know, if you have jack 10 suited or something, you're probably 3-betting that a reasonable amount, you know. So I don't know that he really has more 10s than you. I guess he probably has more combos of like jack 10 and 10-9. But
maybe. Yeah.
It's probably pretty close, and I just also think, you know, given this, you know, given the board and the middle card pairing is kind of a higher card, I don't mind still starting to put money in. I also wouldn't mind checking back and trying to like realize some of our equity with the pair and the flush draw.
Yeah, I did end up checking back for all of the reasons you just stated. I mean, or for trying to realize my equity and utilize my showdown value, and also because I was concerned about him having a 10 or generally being better for his range more so. But I do think that you're right that he doesn't actually have that many more 10s than I do. So I probably should take this large sizing. If I do take a large sizing here, I bet like, you know, 200 into 250, for example, and he jams. I mean, right, because he can't raise without jamming there, I don't think.
Right.
Do we call?
Well, so then we'll need to call 500 to basically win a total pot. We'll need to call 500 to win like 1100, so we probably can't call.
Right.
So that would suck.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess like getting blown off our equity. That's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, I don't want to get blown off our equity here by a check raise, and we have some showdown value. Not a lot, but we can also just make the nuts in position. Or not, it wouldn't be the nuts anymore, but probably the effective nuts in position. Also, if he does have a 10, like our ace outs aren't good anymore, obviously. So,
I think that's fine. I mean, I think the only thing I would definitely not do here is take a small sizing.
Yes.
Like that's what I would. I guess that's what I would say is like I don't mind checking back for like because you do have some amount of showdown value. It's not great, but like it's sure you're you know if we got like blown off our equity by like Queen Jack, like that would be like the worst possible situation, right? Like
definitely
is if he did have a hand and decided to turn it into a bluff. But with that said, I mean, you know, if we bet large, you know, he's probably disincentivized to bluff just because of the sizing we take. And I mean, you know, he can still take those same hands and turn them into bluffs on brick rivers, you know, because we probably are not calling a large bet on a brick river, I would imagine.
Well, let's get to that. So on the river, it goes check, still 250 in the pot, and we get to a river, which is not really a brick. It's the 7 of spades. But completes the backdoor flush draw. It doesn't complete any straights. So it's like fairly brickish, but it's not a complete brick.
Yep.
And he now leads out for 120 into 250. We now have bottom pair for a showdown value. What do we think? Are we bluff catching here? Are we turning our hand into a bluff? Are we folding?
I think I just want to fold here. A lot. I think he just has a ton of like kings here. Like a ton of, you know, king, queen, king, jack suited, all those sort of hands that, you know, I mean, I would say, given this sizing, he probably doesn't have a flush or a boat, but I think he just has a lot of hands that are one pair. And I think once we check back turn, shoving, I think a competent player will probably call a lot when we like shove. Like maybe we can get him to fold sometimes. If we might check back. I don't even know if we would check back like ace king. Probably not on that board on that turn. I guess maybe if that 10 as you said is better for him. Maybe we check back ace king sometimes, and that's a hand we would like raise here for value. But that feels a little thin. Maybe like ace king with the ace of spades, but.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah, I think you're right. I think it would be a skew to turn it into a bluff, and I did fold, so I did that. And
I don't think calling makes any sense. Like, I mean, sure he can have queen jack, but I do think like when we only bet the flop and then like check back turn, he just has like every king in his range.
Right, and also I think queen jack probably takes a larger sizing as a bluff. So yeah, it felt kind of like a value bet to me. I did fold. I never found out what he had, but I don't know. I thought it was a pretty interesting hand, and I guess the reason I really wanted to bring it on here is I felt like, man, I flopped the world, and I just managed to like not do anything with it, and I was like, I feel like I screwed up somewhere on this hand. So I do kind of like your line of taking a large turn sizing better.
I mean, I know we kind of say a lot, don't overplay like a pair and a flush draw. But I think like in a 3-bet pot, when you flop bottom pair on a double Broadway board, you can really treat it more like a flush draw that just happens to have more outs to improve because of the pair, and less like it's a showdown value-y pair. Like if you flop an ace with ace 5 of diamonds, where you kind of can take a more passive route because you actually have like good showdown value.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we talk about that a lot, and so I really appreciate you bringing up that distinction. Like, I'm not playing this hand like I have a pair plus flush draw. Like, I'm gonna wreck his world. No, I'm just like, well, it's really just it's the nut flush draw with extra outs is what it is. So
yes.
So okay, cool. Well, I do think if I had it back, I would have bet 200 on the turn. So all right.
But I might also check it back sometimes just because, in the middle card pairs, like, he might just not fold a king over the next two streets. Kind of depends on the player, but I kind of think that most people, will wind up folding kind of a top pair medium kicker. We could run into ace king sometimes also, but that's life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's certainly not going to let a king go when I raise him on the turn. Or excuse me, when I bet the turn, rather. But I do think he may relinquish it on the river, especially on a river which does complete a backdoor flush draw. And if I'm constructing properly, I should make some of those.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if like turning it into a bluff is. I mean, I don't know. There's kind of an interesting board with the backdoor flush draw with like queen jack, where in the 3-bet pot where he's sort of in early position, you don't. It feels like neither of you necessarily has like more of these sort of draw type hands. Like, you could definitely both have some queen jack suited, for example. So it's kind of a weird spot where I'm not really sure how to manage that. You both, if a 9 comes on the river, who is that actually better for example?
Right, sure. I mean, I guess for me more, I'm thinking like if I'm betting 3 streets, going all in on the river as a bluff, like I'm representing ace king, which I think is very critical. But,
or pocket aces even. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Like I have all of the like super premiums that he just.
But then to your point, he definitely does have like jack 10 suited, but it's still not that many 10s, I would say, right? It's probably not that many 10s. So I think I could go either way. I don't mind playing it passively and just giving up either. I think there's some credit to that. But I'm glad you didn't bet small on the turn.
We did it. All right, cool. So
all right, so I've got another hand here. This is from a recent session I played. The table was definitely pretty soft. A lot of pre-flop calling, a lot of multi-way pots. It got a little bit tighter as the night went on. Eventually, a couple of the players who were giving action got up, and a couple of players who were nits sat down, and then I got up shortly after and left them to enjoy their fold fest. But at this point, the table's pretty good. There's a few players who I think are reasonably competent, a couple players who are quite aggressive, and then most of the players were, standard live players doing a lot of limp calling with really anything. I wound up making a very tight pre-flop fold at one point, in this hand with pocket queens and was immediately shown that I have the best hand pre-flop, but would have lost all my money regardless. So, we take the small things. Anyway, in this hand, this is going to be kind of an interesting hand because it's going to fold all the way around to me on the button, sitting $350 deep. I look down and see 2 cards and decide to raise. Not quite that loose, but I have King of Clubs, 7 of Hearts, which is probably stretching the envelope a little bit for
in a tournament. That's a raise.
I actually think the 2 players on my left, again, kind of standard. I'd say I decide, what, I'm on the button. It's just me. If there's any limps in front of me, I'm just folding. If there's any raise, I'm folding. First in from the button, I'm like, well, I don't need that much of an excuse to put some money in.
Okay, so remind us the suits of your King 7 off.
King of Clubs, 7 of Hearts.
Got it.
It's probably, it's stretching the bounds. But,
it was King of Spades snap raise, but King of Clubs,
that's your randomization. So I make it 15, standard open for this 1-3 game, and only the small blind calls.
Cool.
We're going to go to a flop. A heads up, we're in position with King 7 offsuit. The flop is going to come 6 of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, deuce of clubs.
Okay.
So we pretty much whiff. We've got 2 overcards, and the small blind checks to me.
Backdoor straight draw.
We have a backdoor straight draw and 2 overs.
Yeah.
And a backdoor flush blocker.
Okay. Well, obviously, if you have to bet here, right? I mean, you can't just open King 7 off and then miss and give up, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think this board in particular, obviously I'm betting the crap out of any sort of Broadway high cards on the board.
Sure.
If there's an ace, I'm, shoveling money in as fast as I can. If there's a queen, bet. I think this board in particular, the player to the left of me had just played had been playing a lot of hands, like definitely calling an insane range. So I think this board hits him pretty hard. Like he can definitely have a lot of 2 pair. He can probably have all the 2 pairs.
Maybe so, but I think one thing you have to remember, and I make this mistake a lot in game. I think we talked a few weeks ago about a hand where I made the same mistake. But you have to remember that when you're playing against someone like that who is just ridiculously wide, you want to see bet more because they are less likely to have connected with any flop. Even if it's a flop that theoretically favors their range, they just aren't going to hit it much because they have so much randomness. So I would probably see bet here if you're, if that's the way you would describe the villain, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. My thought is just kind of, I can kind of evaluate, and if he checks the, on the turn and there's any sort of scare card, then I can probably take that as free reign to start betting, and kind of, turn it into sort of a delayed C bet, bet on the river situation. Which, as you said, if he's wide, he's definitely, one of those live regs who is not bluffing at the right frequency, as we've talked about in the past. If he flops nothing and misses, he's just never turning his hand into a bluff. He's just going to check fold over, a lot. So I agree. I think betting here is, just makes the most sense if I'm going to be raising this garbage. But as played, I elect to check it back.
Everybody tune into Bankroll Burners to learn the intricacies of how to properly play King 7 offsuit.
And the river is a fantastic card for me. It's the ace of clubs.
The turn.
I'm really messing up my streets here. The turn is the ace of clubs. So it brings in a backdoor club draw. I have the king of clubs. And it's an ace, which is just marvelous for me.
You got the nut flush blocker.
Well, no. I've got the nut flush draw blocker.
Right. Same thing.
And he checks to me again. And now I think it would be a crime to not bet.
Of course.
I've got, again, this is just a card that's going to smash my range. I think I can kind of take a larger sizing here like I would if I checked back ace high and hit. And then I'm just going to plan on blasting pretty much all rivers except maybe 3s or 4s that put a one-liner out there. Okay. So I like to bet 20 into about 30. And he calls pretty quickly.
Scary stuff.
Do you kind of agree that bet at this point?
I think I mean, I don't know. What does he even have? a six. Well, I guess he doesn't have a six. Well, maybe he does. I don't know. Like,
I
this
think
is
he
the
could have a
thing.
6. That's
He could have a six.
definitely that's reasonable.
He could have a five. Like, that's so funny to me. It's like, well, we have to be, running a 2 street bluff here. It's like we're gonna, spew off a third or a half our stack with king seven off. I just, this is, you think back to your pre-flop decisions and hate life. But yeah, I think probably you're supposed to double barrel here.
Well, I was running with a lot of confidence at this point. I was like, "Oh yeah, we got like, this guy I think is probably going to just fold a lot on rivers if he doesn't have an ace." And obviously, we talk a lot about how live players are weighted so heavily towards aces, but again, this particular player, I don't think that's necessarily the case, and he definitely can have lots of 5, 6s, 7, 8, whatever it is, pocket 4s, pocket 3s, like all sorts of this garbage. And so I'm definitely pleased to see the river roll off the 10 of clubs, as it does bring in the backdoor flush where I've got the king of clubs, and it's another overcard to any sort of medium strength pair that he's got.
Yeah.
And
now you really do have the nut flush blocker.
Now I really do, and I even said that it was the river when it actually was. So double win, and he checks to me, so even better.
All right.
And I think taking a large sizing here makes good sense. I think I even could have bet more than I did. I could probably take a pot size bet here.
Okay.
A lot of the time, I mean, I have the blocker. I think I guess I probably wouldn't do this with an ace, so it's kind of. I think an interesting decision here is to kind of think what we're actually repping and what we're trying to make him fold.
Right, for sure. I mean, if you're trying to represent an ace, I don't think a pot size bet makes any kind of sense. I'd probably bet if I had like a good-ish ace here, like, I mean, trying to get a crying call, I'd probably bet like 40 or something.
Yeah, and the pot at this point is 70. So just to remind our listeners.
I'm sorry, I missed something.
That's a.
Wait, didn't you? Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
So I raised to 15 pre-flop. He called, which made it 30. I bet 20 on the turn, and he called, which made it about 70. At this point, the board is now 6-5, deuce, ace, 10 with 3 clubs, which came in a backdoor fashion. I've got the king of clubs. I've got king 7, thanks to my own bad pre-flop decisions. But yeah. I mean, I think that's fair, and something that I didn't think about enough is like, especially if I happened to be against a good player here, which, by the way, if there were good players in the blinds, I would most certainly just fold.
Yeah, I mean, because, I probably would just try to represent like a flush or 2 pair and bet quite large here. That's probably, like, I feel like if you really had an ace, you'd probably only bet like 30 or 40, and I don't think he might just not fold for that price, so I'd probably just take a large sizing and try to rep something nutty.
Yeah, so I decided to kind of go in between, which is probably the worst option, and I bet 50, which I think maybe definitely I'd probably do the size, take the sizing with like a 2 pair type hand,
Sure.
Maybe even a good ace, because I don't think he has got the backdoor flush all that often. But I decided to bet 50, and he goes deep into the tank. I mean, he probably takes 3 minutes. Like, takes out, carves out calling chips, thinks and thinks and thinks, and then eventually folds and tells me later that he had, quote, a 5. So,
wow.
One of these spots where, I feel like, as I came out of the hand, I was like, wow, I played that so well. I can't believe I got this sick bluff through it. And then, as I thought about how I was going to present this hand on the podcast, I was like, wow, this all could have, like, I wouldn't have had to do that if I had just, like, played a better range.
Yeah, you're gonna have to you had to share with the world that you played king 7 offsuit.
With, by the way, if you're on the button and the blinds are tight, like, you should raise like a lot.
Oh yeah,
a lot. Does king 7
with any kind of post flop playability at all?
Yeah, if you have like 2 suited cards, that is probably a raise. Like, not kidding.
Yeah, but king 7 offsuit is pushing it.
So
anyway.
Wanted to share another kind of interesting hand, but this week's session ran quite card dead. I violated that rule of not trying to make money while card dead, but didn't let me down here. But that's trying to find interesting hands where we can.
Absolutely. Got to do it for the podcast. All right. Well, I've got another hand versus that same villain. Like I said, this is not much later actually. We are 660 effective in this hand. We are only 7-handed. Someone's up having a cigarette, and I'm on the button. And so in this case, villain is in. The villain's in the hijack, but actually it's the low jack who I don't remember anything about. Who opens this up to 15, and the villain, the competent reg in the hijack, simply calls.
And by the way, I'd like to commend you for taking a seat in position to the competent player.
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't like it was the only open seat at the table. Yeah, so it's funny. There was a guy in between the two of us who was like, he was quite nitty, and he was the reason it took so long for my straddle to catch on, because he was complaining every time I straddled. So
it's so annoying. I mean, it is annoying, and in that, I had something like that happen like last weekend where we were like, oh yeah, the whole table will straddle, and this one guy was like, I am absolutely not straddling, and we were like, okay, the whole table except for that guy will straddle.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the guy. Like, he was definitely fun to play with and fun to chat with. So, nothing against him. He didn't want to straddle. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he folds, and then I am on the button again. And I have ace of hearts, 10 of clubs, which most of the time I'm going to fold. And against a competent villain, even more so, I would like to fold this hand. But for some reason, I was like, once in a blue moon, I will 3-bet this hand from the button, and this is going to be that blue moon. So I did 3-bet here. I squeezed up to $60.
Sounds good. I mean, I think if you're going to play this hand, the 3-bet is the way, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
We shouldn't really be calling with it. I might call with this hand because I like burning money, but not anymore. There's the new and improved Josh coming to you live next week. No more pre-flop calling. Except in all the scenarios where we've defined. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Once in a while, taking kind of these Broadway aces and putting in a 3-bet, totally fine. And by that, I guess I specifically mean ace 10 and ace jack, because like ace queen is probably where you cross the line and become a value 3-bet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a 3-bet bluff. Like, I would like them both to fold. I also think that because he is field called here, he's a competent player, his range is probably not that good. Not that strong.
A lot of pocket pairs, you'd think.
Which should fold given stack depth.
Yep.
So the low jack, the initial opener, folds, and the hijack says, well, I guess I'll double flat, and calls.
Did he say that?
That is what he said.
So this is really a guy who's just not afraid to throw around poker terminology. Although I will say, by the way, it's so interesting to me that like poker like these YouTube broadcasts and vlogs and stuff are so widespread that I see like people who just have no idea what they're doing casually throw around terms like, range and flat and all this stuff that, I would not really expect them to have a handle on. And it's quite funny to me when someone says like, oh, well, that card was so good for, like, I had to bet my range there, and they just are, use it completely incorrectly.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty amusing. But I mean, yeah, he calls. And we are now, I think, about 140 in the pot ish.
Yep.
And the flop is a pretty interesting one. I mean, I'm obviously unhappy, right? I didn't really want to call.
Hey, we're on the button, right?
Right, exactly. So the flop is 6 of hearts, 8 of clubs, 9 of spades.
9 of spades, 8 of clubs, 6 of hearts.
Yeah, I'll say them in a descending order for you. So rainbow board, and bad for us, like real bad for us. I mean, 9s, 8s, 6s are very likely hands he has. Pocket 7s he could definitely have. So, which is an open ender, obviously. So I'm not pleased with this at all. And it checked all the way through, which I'm pretty pleased that nobody led. So
I mean, it's just him, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm pretty pleased. Oh, you know what? It's not just him. I'm sorry. The low jack called. I totally screwed that up.
Cool.
Yes. So we are 3 ways.
So it's about 200 in the pot, but yes, yep. I mean, with there being multiple opponents, definitely more likely one of them would have led. You know what? I wouldn't like c-betting into one opponent, and I like it even less into two opponents.
Yeah. So yeah. So I'm sorry. This is multi-way. I don't know how I screwed that up. Jeez. But yeah, so it checks all the way around. So
cool. Well, I definitely like it so far. We have a chance to realize our equity, as we like to say.
We do. We have a chance. And I will say too. Well, actually, we'll get to that later. Sorry. So the turn now comes the King of Hearts. So we now have a backdoor heart draw, and I have the Ace of Hearts.
So you also have the backdoor nut draw blocker.
Yes. I also have the straight blocker and the open-ended straight draw blocker.
So you have the straight blocker to 7-10.
And which I don't think one of them is likely to have. I have the blocker of Jack 10, which is an open-ended straight draw. I'm blocking Jack 10 suited.
You are blocking although you are ahead of Jack 10 suited.
Yes, I am ahead of Jack 10 suited.
Okay.
But well, we'll get to that in a sec. I'm also ahead of random, flush.
Yeah.
So the low Jack checks, and then the hijack, the competent player bets $50, about a quarter pot. And why am I talking about all these blockers? So I have a gutter here, which is not enough equity to simply call, especially not in between another opponent. But I do think my hand actually has good bluffing properties because like I said, I'm blocking Jack 10, which is a hand that will call a raise. I'm blocking the nut flush draw, which is a hand that will call a raise. I think the most likely hand he has is a 9, which I believe will call my raise, but will likely fold to a river bet. And I also think, I could make a straight here and probably be good. And of course, the king finally is good for my range because I can have ace king. So for all those reasons, I elect to bluff here. What do you think?
Well, I'm kind of thinking, yeah. I mean, I like the idea of turning our hand into a bluff at some point. I wonder, I obviously, as you said, your hand having just a gut shot doesn't have enough equity to call the turn. What do you think about like calling the turn and then turning your hand into a bluff on the river? If like scare cards come, like it's kind of a weird way to think about like equity where it's not really like, I don't know if there's any merit to kind of thinking, well, if a heart comes, I'm going to be, I'll rip, I'll just raise the river. If another key, if a queen comes, I can raise the river because I'm blocking Jack 10, or if the Jack comes, I'm blocking Queen 10, is there some school of thought where you could say, well, I don't have enough equity based on my hand, like my actual equity to call, but, do I have enough fold equity on the river where, river raises are so strong, there are enough cards that come where I can get him off something on the river and call here, because that kind of shows a lot of strength as well.
Interesting. I think maybe if we were heads up, but if I call here and then low Jack calls, I actually think I could never do that, unfortunately.
That's true. And if you call, then the low Jack probably will call a lot, especially if he's the low Jack you said you have pretty much no info on, so I'm gonna assume he's an ABC live reg and probably will call because he views himself as being priced in with most hands. So that's definitely a fair point where given the extra player, raising now makes sense. I mean, I guess, if you think that a 9 is like a lot of his range, I mean, first of all, what 9s do you think he has being a double flatter? Like it's probably pretty much 10-9 exclusively, right?
Could be ace 9 suited. Could be Jack 9 suited, maybe.
If he's like me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It probably shouldn't be Jack 9 suited. I don't
think
he would.
Exactly. I think Jack 9 suited probably should not be flatting once, let alone twice.
I think ace 9 suited is plausible.
Okay. So fair enough.
I do think 9 is the most likely to your, I didn't think about that in game, but to your, like, as you say it now, I think yes.
Yeah, well, because I was just thinking, if we're thinking about calling where, it is quite a small bet, can we think of our ace and 10 as being live as well? But if we think that the most likely combos of nines are 10-9 and ace-9, then we probably shouldn't think either are necessarily live.
Yeah, I wouldn't really think we have live pairouts here. I do think our straight, I think that if we make our straight, we're likely going to be, I guess, at the very worst, chopping. I'm not really concerned about. I mean, I guess like Jack 10 is possible, but I don't think it's very likely.
Yeah, he could definitely have Jack 10 suited. I mean, low Jack could also have Jack 10 suited for what it's worth, but I agree that our straight is likely going to be good. And obviously we have the ace of hearts if like the 7 of hearts happens to roll off. So don't mind a bluff here.
Yeah,
I don't. But for the record, I don't necessarily hate a call here because I don't think our, I think our pairouts might be live. Also, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of like, well, if he has a lot of 10-9, then our straight outs aren't really like making our hand here isn't really that good because we're just going to chop. So maybe this should be a fold. Like maybe I'd rather do this with ace jack or blocking, but then we don't have the straight outs anyway. So
yeah, it's interesting where I'm not really sure whether it feels like all three options are kind of like at least under consideration.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is like I don't think there are that many like natural bluffs for me to have here, so it is nice to have some of these weirder ones.
And it's also nice that like, and I definitely see your point that when he bets the small sizing, like, I'm definitely concerned on the flop that he's got, a double flatting hand is like, as you kind of said, is likely like a monster on this board. Like there's, 9s, 7s, 8s, 6s that all just have you beat and also have like just tons of equity. Even like pocket sevens, as you said, literally has you beat and also in bad shape in the future. So given his sizing here, I'm now much less concerned about that, and definitely a big sign of weakness. And for that reason, I definitely don't mind turning our hand into a bluff.
Yeah, I will say if he had taken a large sizing here, I think I just pretty much lay this down pretty quickly.
Oh, I think easily. Yeah.
So, and as he actually brought that up later when we discussed the hand. So I'd make it 150 here, which I don't know if that I'm in love with the sizing, to be honest with you. I might have wanted to go a little bigger, like 200.
Yeah, it's a little weird with the stacks. If we make it 150, we'll basically have a pot size bet left on the river, but we're also just laying him like very, very good odds to call. Like he only needs like 20% equity to call, which he's probably gonna do. With all nines, obviously, if your plan is to double barrel, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like to get him to call here and then just jam for pot size where he really can't call if he doesn't improve on the river with a 9.
Right, we give him a bad river price, which is like kind of since our plan is to double barrel here, so maybe this was actually fine sizing.
Yeah, so I don't mind that based on that thought. The other consideration is I want like if your raise is small enough where the low jack is going to call some amount, that would also be like really bad.
Yes, agreed, and that did not happen. Thankfully, the low jack does fold, and Dylan and the hijack thinks for a little bit and does make the call.
And that's probably again just because we're laying him such good odds where he only needs to call 100 to win 400.
Right.
Because the pot's now going to be basically 500 and we've got 450 behind.
Basically, yeah, pretty close to it. A little less than 500, but yeah. And the river now is really interesting. It's the 10 of spades.
Okay.
So Queen Jack makes a straight. I think he really shouldn't have that ever.
Probably not.
Unless it's exactly Queen Jack of hearts. Rather.
Yep.
He can definitely have Queen Jack of hearts. Queen Jack of hearts might rip it on me too, though. So, I'm not really worried about Queen Jack. Yeah. It's also, but of course we pick up some showdown value.
Right.
We are now beating a 9. But here's where things get interesting. Villain now rips it. Open rips it. Yeah.
That's kind of gross because. Oh man. I mean, like the thing is, right when he does this, he's pretty much representing Queen Jack or maybe a 7, right? Because now there's also a one-liner to a 7.
But like, think about this is what I was thinking in game. Like, if he has pocket 7s, which were like 8-7, I guess. Maybe double flats that hand.
Yep.
Although like, I don't think he would, to be honest.
Sure.
I really think this guy's quite capable.
Pair
So
plus a 7, we'll say.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's pretty weird. Like in the game, I was like, none of the value hands make a ton of sense. Like, is pocket sevens really open ripping it here? Because I could have queen jack.
Well, the hand that I think does kind of make sense is like maybe 10-9 does this, because you shouldn't have sevens. Like, yes, you have queen jack, but like if he, like as you said, like your raise on the turn is really repping like ace king, or
Sure.
you know, some sort of one pair hand like that, and like this jam, if he's got 10-9, like this jam like basically gets snap called by ace king.
Sure.
And like, so maybe that's probably the value hand that I'm really thinking about. Like, I agree with you. I also really think like a 7 is not taking that small sizing on the river or on the turn, as we kind of meant, like as we mentioned, like it does.
Yeah.
So this feels to me like he's like it's a 2 pair, maybe pocket 10s, but I don't. If he's good, then he probably isn't double flatting pocket 10s. He's probably 3-betting pocket 10s. And we also block pocket 10s, and there's one combo, so...
Right, yeah. I think you can probably double flat pocket 10s sometimes, especially if you're trying to make your double flat range not suck.
But I think 10-9 is like what he's repping here, basically, right?
Yeah, I really... In-game, I was also like, what the hell is the bluff here? Like, really, what the hell is he bluffing with here? That was the other thought I had. It was like, Jack 9 that thinks it's... That, like, is like... I don't even know.
Or maybe ace 9 suited... Right? If he just decides my 9's no good after I get raised, like maybe I can just jam.
Because that was ultimately because I couldn't really think of any like bluffs that made any kind of sense. I laid this one down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because like we do make the showdown value, but also we do have like a bunch of good hands, like much better hands to call with.
Right.
Like, I mean, even some of our 3-bet bluffs, we're probably 3-betting, like, you know, turn into 2 pair or a straight, and are not exactly ace 10 offsuit.
Right. Yeah, no, I laid this one down. And
we're also blocking hearts, I would note. If we're blocking the nut heart draw, and that's like a big, you know, that's definitely a bluff. So, yeah.
Now it's bad to have the ace of hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, all good points, and I did let this one go. And a few hands later, Villain did tell me he had 10-9 of hearts.
Wow, so he really turned the pair plus flush draw and didn't overplay it. How about that?
Yeah, I know, right? Well, he told me he was considering like 3-bet jamming the turn, but I decided against it. No, I think it was very well played. I really, to be honest, like it's sort of a thin value jam because like I can have some better hands, but I also do have a lot of worse hands that will call. Like I think it's really, really good jam. I'm confident I would not have found the jam, but I think it's very good.
Because I mean, I think given like as played, you could even have like aces and like queens and stuff. Like aces really are kind of another hand he can target, because I do think like 9-8-6 you can, especially rainbow, you can check back sometimes with aces, because like you know, there's no like with a front door flush draw, I'd be more inclined to bet aces on a board like that, because like, you know, there's so many cards we don't want to, you know, cards we don't want to see on the turn, versus 9-8-6, you know, a hand you can check back aces. So he's, you know, he can definitely be targeting aces and ace king with this jam. I agree, it's kind of a weird thin value jam, because you could also have pocket kings here.
Right, sure.
Like you can have kings, you can have queen jack, but you know, you can also have a bunch of stuff that connected a lot worse, or you can have like ace king and aces, which are just like probably gonna call this jam.
Yeah.
Like I assume if you have ace king, you're pretty much you're calling this jam pretty quick.
I don't know, pretty quick. I think I would be in a similar sort of like, but I really don't know what I would do with ace king, to be honest with you. Like I can't say. I'm not sure. Again, I might end up pressing fold, because I'd be like, well, what the heck, like, does he have? And also, like, I'm then unblocking pocket tens, which is another hand I lose to. So I might actually also fold ace king, but I think I also might not. So.
Well, and you know, we do like to say, you know, whenever we say a villain is competent and we like try and give them credit for bluffing and call, we're always wrong.
Right. So I didn't give him credit for finding a bluff here. I just was like, I think I lose. But
Yeah,
so
yeah, like even good villains, like it's hard to bluff rivers.
yeah, this guy was awesome. I really liked playing with him a lot. He won. He was the beneficiary of the $1,000 call from the Ace Nine offsuit. So.
Well, it's, I'm good that he was a good guy, but never fun to see the best player at the table win large pots from VIPs.
Right. I know. So lame.
Unless that best player is me, but that is very rare.
Yeah, that's an interesting hypothesis. That's an interesting theoretical scenario.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, everybody, I believe you've wasted yet another hour and change listening to us prattle on about our failures in poker. So
these hands particularly, I feel like we played them. We decisions were made throughout.
I know. I spent so long roasting you for playing King 7 off, and you let me get away with playing Ace 10 off, which is really sweet of you.
I think it's just an interesting spot where I feel like being the pre-flop police, if you're raising, I'm gonna let you get away with it for the most part because we wouldn't have a podcast if we just folded all our borderline hands. That's where the fun comes in.
Exactly. That's our excuse. Anytime I make a bad play from now on, it's for the podcast.
Well, it's not like I open limped King 7 from the button.
Right.
Because then I would have really deserved it. But, if you're going to raise from the button with any king, any ace, and any suited hand, I'm not going to fault you for it.
No, all right. Fair enough. Well, everybody, I think that about wraps it up.
On that lovely note, yeah. Have a good one. And once again, don't forget to click like and subscribe. And leave a comment. Let us know how we could have played the hands better, and maybe what your opening ranges look like to let us know what a good player's ranges are really composed of.
Yeah, it'd be helpful for us to find out. So, all right, bye everybody.